Our session today is crafting a new member orientation. This session will be led by Denise Holmes. Denise is currently the VP of Education on the Washington Street Toastmasters Club. I almost said Wall Street, the other side of the country. It meets downtown Portland on the first and third Wednesdays of each month in the morning. As the VP of Education, a role she has held multiple times, she's especially proud of the new member orientation she created for her club as a way to align a new member's goals with the Toastmaster program and to help the member feel excited and reassured about their choice to join the club. Denise expects this to be an interactive session that builds on what attendees already know while giving some ideas to put into practice for your own new member orientation. Help me welcome Denise Holmes.
Thank you, Steve. Nice little tongue twister to get the words working in the morning. Welcome everyone to this session. I am super excited about it. I'm not going to say much else about myself other than my professional background is in human resources and training and development, and then a consultant for the last 11 years in coaching leaders and teams, really around organizational engagement and effective behavior, sort of the people side of change. And one of the things I've always been passionate about is, one, how to help people feel included and valued the moment they join a new organization, how to help them be effective right when they start. And it fits right in with a VP of Education role. So I love anything related to new member orientation kinds of topics. Now, let's say we get a new member that comes in and they've got personal goals that they have. And in fact, if you remember back to when you first joined, or you could even say now, in the chat box, put what some of your personal goals were or are for joining Toastmasters. What were some of the personal goals that came up for you? Let's see what comes up. And I'm sorry for those that would prefer to talk versus chat. You will have a moment in the meeting to chat with each other, but with a group of this size, it gets a little unwieldy. Things like building confidence, improve impromptu speaking, more confident, giving a speech without fainting or freezing. That's intense. Ability to respond to questions, right? Improve testimony at public meetings, develop leadership skills. So there's all kinds of reasons people join. And I think the key thing is that they're personal. And they join a club. And then there's all this other stuff that has to match up with what the personal goals are. How do they become a member of the club so that they can start working on those personal goals? That's what we're really going to figure out, is how to get people a quick start in this. And before we do, though, this is my presentation piece. I moved things around, but well, we'll do this way. Sorry, presenter freeze. I kept changing my mind on the order of things that I wanted. So thanks for your patience on that and letting me be human. What we're going to really talk about here is the why, what, and how to creating the effective and engaging new member orientation. What are the advantages, right? The what are the components of it? And then how do you actually get started with your roadmap? And before we get into this, here's another thing to put into the chat box, is given what I've explained as the topic of the session, or what you knew coming into this, what specific question or challenge do you hope gets answered? Or what other outcomes are you hoping you'll get from today's session? Let's take a moment. And Steve, I'm going to ask you to help me capture some of these themes on here. So what specific question or challenge do you hope gets answered, or what other desired outcomes you hope to have?
Janice says new ideas and perspectives. Frederick says breeze into pathways. Gina, welcome Gina, says new ideas that fit with the change to Zoom environment. That's a big one. Peter DeGraff, improve member retention. Barbara Wynn mentions outcome, have a ready to go process for a brand new member. And Jerry Phillips, smoothly onboard new members, pathways, toast host. All great comments.
Okay.
Mark says, or writes, help get new members engaged with the club. And then Mr. Flanning includes ideas to create our own transition from guest to member. Great thoughts, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Some of these will definitely be touched on. I know when I share an example of what we do, I'll talk briefly about how we transition that into Zoom. And I don't know that it's an argument for Pathways, but I think it helps introduce the Pathways program. And it should touch on a lot of the other things that were coming up for you. As I go through this, please continue putting ideas, questions, thoughts in the chat box. And while I'm presenting, it's a little hard for me to monitor the chat box, but Steve will actually be the chat box monitor and has absolute permission to interrupt me at any time if he needs to. The other thing is if I seem to be talking too fast, because I get excited, put a slow down, please, in there. And again, Steve, if you see that, just interrupt me. Thank you, everyone, for that. Okay. And the poll screen I have is not coming up. Let's just go ahead and launch the poll. Does everyone see a poll in front of you?
Yes.
And there are 4 questions. Go ahead and take a moment to respond to those. I want to see who's in the room. How long you've been a Toastmaster generally? I'm curious about the roles. That's true. There is no category for a year plus. It sort of jumped to a year to 2 years. All right, we're almost done here. I'm wondering if someone who has a sort of response can unmute themselves and say a few words about what you mean by sort of. What does that look like or sound like?
This is Constance speaking.
Thanks,
We
Constance.
have a VP membership who has developed an aggressive program for bombarding visitors and interested parties with every kind of information. And so we purposefully step back from overwhelming them. And he and I have spoken. I'm a VP Ed and relatively new. We've spoken about how to better double team. The idea is that once they're interested, he hands them off to me. I have a teaching background and was a teacher mentor. So, but we've scarcely gotten that far. We're a small town.
Yeah, well, and you're talking about one of the things that isn't really covered in this presentation as well, which is the transition between roles from guest and getting them signed up and when do those handoffs occur. And that's a really good topic to have. About at least one other person who had responded sort of. Is someone else willing to share what their sort of means?
This is Mark. We have a new member onboarding document that I don't think we've really used. So it's kind of out there, but apparently hasn't been used in a while.
Got it. Okay. So there's something that you could potentially utilize or adjust. It's just not in action at the moment, meaning it is inactive.
Right.
Great. Thanks. And, in terms of the roles, I think about this role as ideally suited to VP of Education, but obviously it doesn't have to be VP of Education for that. And let me just do a quick check on the. So about 6 folks or 30% said no idea of new member orientation resources on the Toastmaster International website. At the end, I will show you some of those things that are available. I actually did not know they were available before I started doing the new member orientation, or even until I started making sure that I checked what else was out there for this presentation. So that was some good learning for me. Thank you all. Now let's talk about the why. And you might already have a sense that, well, don't we already know what the why is? Didn't Denise already says it so people could get started quickly into the club? Doesn't it link to what we already said we're interested in terms of this? But I think one of the best ways to get connected to the why is to step into some of those old shoes, to remember when was that time that you first joined a new club or even a new organization, if it's applicable that way, and what was that like? And so in a moment, you will be put into breakout groups. Let's see. Jim, let's 6 or 7 breakout groups, I think we're good. And what I'm going to have you do, don't spend time on chatting and getting to know each other first. A nice brief round of names would be nice so you break that ice, but get focused pretty quickly on the discussion, which is, one, what are some of the descriptions of what it was like as a brand new member? And it could be positive, neutral, or a little bit more negative. And then what helped you get oriented quickly if you had that experience? If you didn't have that experience, what would have helped you get oriented quickly? And then the third question is, what was the impact on you and the club of the, I'm calling it a NEMO, new member orientation, NMO process, right? Or what was the impact of the lack of process? And as soon as you're in the breakout groups, I'll copy and put those into the chat. If you haven't been in breakout groups before, just know that there's a countdown timer will be in the top window. And when that time is up, you're whisked back into the main group, and we'll ask for some suggestions of what came up. And we can do, for once, I am way ahead of my timing. I love it. So let's do a nice, robust 8-minute discussion. Does that sound good, Jim? 8-minute breakout groups?
Okay. So everyone will be automatically moved into breakout rooms, and at the end of 8 minutes, the breakout rooms will close. Would like me to go ahead and do that right now?
Yes, please.
Start them up? Okay, here we go.
If we were meeting in person, we would be handing out the forms for the grammarian, the listener, the evaluators and whatnot. So
Pretend you're in Oz, or going from Kansas to Oz.
Make sure that forms go out 2 days in advance.
I just want to remind everybody to mute your microphone as you're in the main meeting.
Until you get to the breakout room, of course.
Mr. Fanning clicked his heels, and I have clicked my heels also. So we should be entering the breakout room soon.
It didn't do the automatic assignment of breakout rooms we expected it would. Okay, Avatar, we're currently in breakout rooms, so I'm going to move you to a breakout room very quickly.
Yeah, thanks. I know I always have trouble with the breakout rooms. I can't get into them the first time, so I ended up out of the meeting.
Ah,
I was in breakout room 1, and I hope I can join this time.
okay, Jack, we're currently in breakout rooms, so I'm going to move you to a breakout room very quickly. Whoops, actually, it looks like I can't move you to a breakout room. Were you in a breakout room? So
Hi, can anyone hear me? I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble with the breakout rooms. I'm going to try to rejoin in a browser.
okay, I'm gonna.
Okay. I'll be right back. I'm going to try with the browser because it's not working with the app. Just a second, please.
Okay.
Well, welcome back. I I had a totally unexpected technical thing. I didn't expect to be whisked into a group. And then in the Zoom that I use, I'm able to escape. You know, it's not one of those fancy escape rooms where you have to find the clues to get out. And so I was a little stuck, and I wasn't able to, like I promised, send everyone what the summary of the questions was, and I wasn't able to get out. So I apologize. And Paul, I know you said you were really paying attention, or Paul Fanning, I don't know if we have more than one Paul in here. You were paying attention for when you're speaking later. If you have breakout groups, just think about that. uh, and we can't assume, just like I can't assume that downtown in Oregon is Portland for everybody. We can't assume that Zoom is also the same interface when you're using someone else's account. So,
Just so you know, and when you go to put people in breakout rooms, you can go to options and there's a box you can check that gives people the opportunity to leave the breakout room.
yeah, well, that wasn't checked.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it was checked this time. So just a further note for somebody, whoever's doing it. So
yes, thank you. It's been really a great learning experience just in having to do Zoom, and then in this extra experience of the TLI. So, where did my PowerPoint go on here? There we go.
To cover your microphone.
Yeah, actually, I see the
Cover it.
option for allow participants to return to the main session anytime is checked. So I don't know why that didn't work. But also I expected it to randomly assign people and it didn't. So I had to manually assign everyone real quick.
Well, everyone, let's give Jim, our Zoom master, like a round of applause then for managing that. So you stepped into some old shoes. What are some of the things that came up from the discussion? And especially, first of all, let's even focus this more specifically. What were some of the things that made it a positive experience for you? If someone can unmute themselves.
This is Jerry Phillips. It was good to just talk with other people and see what their situation was. You can kind of empathize and relate to the different experiences. I think you also have your screen reversed. We're seeing the small preview.
I sure. Oh, thank you.
You're
Feedback is
welcome.
important. Here we go. How's that?
There we go.
One of the things that came up in our discussion was that each club that represented by people speaking had a unique and distinct personality walking in. So first thing that tells us is we won't be able to work with a step-by-step to meet those challenges.
Say more about what that means, like why you can't have a step-by-step process to meet those challenges. I might not totally be following.
For instance, one lady shared that she's been in Toastmasters for an admirably long time, when apparently, you know, they use terms like, I'm paraphrasing, Toastmaster and Toastmistress. Margie, was it Margie? Did you want to speak to that?
Yes. They actually did. They didn't use Toastmistress. It was Toastmaster, even though the gentleman there would have preferred it just be all men. But that was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. So, but the idea that clubs do have their own unique character and processes, and so how do you introduce a new member to that and add your nuances onto either what might already exist, or do you start from scratch and create your own orientation around those?
Our own club was mostly business people, and they were hard chargers back when they had 20 people. But during COVID, I expressed that those whose businesses were now flourishing because of the nature of the shutdown. They felt like they were too busy and that they have it, and they dropped away. And then others, if their businesses are not flourishing, they felt like they were too busy and dropped away. One of the things that happens is it opens a space for people like me who are less ambitious, and yet we have the challenge of trying to redefine our group personality to be inclusive.
Yeah, right. Okay. What else came up? Let's hear from some other groups. And especially if you had in your group someone who is a member for less than a year, where the experience is fresh. Anyone willing to unmute yourself and share?
Well, when I joined the club, I knew they had a membership, a VP of mentorship. And so I knew that mentors were available before I joined. I did know people from the club. And that was really helpful. And she's still the VP of mentorship. I've been in the club for 9 years. And she is really careful to make sure any new member is paired up with a mentor so that any questions about the roles are answered up front. So she's always still my go-to person for what would Catherine do.
Yes, and I've met Catherine.
Yeah.
Passionate about the subject. So for anyone who doesn't have a VP of mentorship roles, for example, my club doesn't have that. It's hard enough to fill the main roles to get someone to fill that extra role. But that is, especially as the club grows, you can have specialty topics like mentorship that then might handle something like this and make it even longer than an initial orientation process. Okay. Let's hear from at least one other person, maybe two, but one other person. Can you unmute yourself and share what came up from the group?
Hi, I'm Lachlan. I can share
Hi.
kind of what came up for me. I just remember when I first started feeling very overwhelmed with the process of starting Toastmasters, and not necessarily just with like the roles and what to do in the meetings, but the like website pathways, like all of that just felt kind of really confusing and overwhelming. And I did get assigned a mentor and that was helpful, but still like pathways when I joined, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago was still really new. And like the Toastmasters website is not very user friendly. And so that also is very confusing how to navigate that. And I don't remember getting any sort of specific help with like, how do you navigate the website and sort of make it user friendly for you?
Yeah.
So I think those are kind of the main sticking points that I always think about when sort of orienting new members. And then also, especially now, with Zoom and all of this online stuff, that we have members, you might have new members that aren't great with technology. So now having to give some orientation on just technology piece, I think is something we need to start thinking about.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lachlan. So here's a point I'd like all of you to remember is that there are resources on the Toastmaster International website. I'll point you towards some of them. And as Lachlan said, they're not all easy to find. I had trouble figuring out where I had found some and finally did. But I think one of the main things about the having some sort of new member orientation process, and by this I'm talking about either an orientation meeting and or a checklist where you can walk someone through a paced way of figuring out where to start, is so important to reduce that sense of overwhelm. Right. And Lachlan, can I put you on the spot one more time?
Yeah. Hi.
So if your sense of overwhelm had been reduced considerably, how would that have made your experience different?
I think in the especially in the very beginning, like the first 6 months, I would have felt more able to focus on like giving my first speech. And I did give my first speech in the first 2 months, but I also felt a little bit like, I don't even know, really, I didn't feel comfortable navigating pathways and what that sort of meant in the sort of big scheme of things. And I think knowing that sort of maybe the big picture of things would have helped me feel not so sort of overwhelmed and confused, and maybe a little bit more prepared and ready to give that first speech.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay. Any final comments before I move on? Does anyone want to unmute and add their voice?
Yeah,
No,
hi, my name's Sean.
listening.
Okay, there's going to be two. Sounds like I just saw Mark, and was Sean the other one that was starting to talk, or?
Yes.
Okay, so Mark first, then Sean, and then I'll move on. Mark?
Listening to Margie's experience kind of triggered in me the thought that we have some new members that are not English native speakers. So they're joining the club to improve their English skills. So they already have, one disadvantage of trying to navigate, websites and trying to understand things in English where they may not be real comfortable with the language. So I wonder if you've seen anything to help with that.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Sean?
Yeah, hi. I was listening, and one of the things I wanted to bring up was as a newcomer for some of the other people, I didn't get a chance to speak what my experience was as a newcomer, but what they were communicating was they felt dominated from the beginning in the meeting, in that they were not the main type of people that were there. And so they felt dominated, and that was kind of intimidating for them. However, those people were really, really helpful and got them on board. But they just didn't feel that they had ever taken any type of micro inequities training or inclusion and diversity. And kind of like my impression of the whole thing was, it's like getting together with a bunch of experienced surfers, even though I've never surfed before. Sometimes you just got to get a surfboard and get out there. And that's exactly what they did. And they stuck around. But maybe it's something to consider for newcomers, is maybe we might do a micro inequities training where we realize there's different people, and we need to be very conscious that they have their feelings hurt, and that we don't want to drive those people away. We want them to let them know that we've been trained in that type of thing, where we take newcomers from all different backgrounds and everything else, and care about how they feel.
Yeah, Sean, thanks for adding that, Lance. And more often than not, the new members that join our club are somewhat anxious about speaking and being put on the spot. Once or twice, we've had members who, like, right from the go are confident and they just want to practice something else. Maybe it's the extemporaneous speaking, or they have a specific goal. But remembering just even how much harder it is when you're feeling like you don't fit or you're not given the space is so important. And when we're good at something and we don't even think about what it takes to get us there, we forget how hard it is. So I like that idea of micro inequities training. I might bring that to my club. Thank you. I'm gonna move on for everyone. So I really appreciate the discussion. So the goal, this is finishing up the first part, which is the why, right? Their goal is an engaged contributing member. And one way to think of this is if you've got a Nemo, not an orange fish, but a new member orientation, that one, you can quickly increase their sense of competence, like how they find information, how they sign up for roles. You can increase their confidence in doing so. And because if the process includes an alignment of how they do those things with what their personal goals are, you're also then increasing their commitment to the club. Now, what we're not really talking about here is what's the why for the club to have a member that quickly gets on board. And those are things like if you're struggling to fill roles, you've got a member who is signing up, right? You've got a member who adds some new voices and experiences and background that adds to a diversity that can be experienced in a club. If there are other things where you've seen the experience that, it's not just for the new member, but there's an advantage to the club, feel free to add that to the chat. All right. By the way, I love this picture. I think we all have a super person cape on our back, and we just need to let it be unleashed and nourished. Okay. So the components, what might you include in some of this? And I think some of this has been alluded to. I'd like you, if you have a piece of paper or if you have a document on your screen, to yourself, make a note of the top 3 things. Like if you had to pick the, first 3 things that you'd want a new member to know or to be introduced to, what would those be? I'll give you a minute for that. And as you're writing that, I'm going to bring up the document that I'm currently used. Okay. Feel free to keep making notes to yourself. What? All right. View. I am going to put, by the end of this, I'll put a link so you can download this yourself in Google Docs. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do right here is just describe some of the components of what my approach has been. And this is after the new member has their login to Toastmasters International and where we've set them up on our local club site so that they can sign up for roles. So that's when they have this. And I send this document to them ahead of time and schedule a meeting. It used to be in person and now it's virtual, and I can talk about that a little bit. So I start with a funnel concept, big and then narrowing down. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail about the big stuff because honestly, most new members that I've talked with, they're not interested in that unless they're a new member from another club. But it's important, I think, for them to know the context that there's this bigger Toastmasters International out there and how our club mission fits in with that. And I just list out some information so that they know those context, right? Because this is something that they read, this page is pretty text heavy. There's just some useful links to them, the Toastmasters International site and then our local club site. Because 3446.toastmastersclubs.org, it's not intuitive like Washington Street Toastmasters. Then what I like to do is share some initial options of how they can participate. And the point is that it's based on their enthusiasm, what's their bandwidth, what are their goals, right? One is just showing up. One is holding a meeting role, and I link to the Toastmaster International site on information about meeting roles. Giving them a suggestion of where to start. Suggest to them about the icebreaker, and then a conversation is how do they get there. Let them know that leadership is an aspect of the club roles. I haven't yet met someone who's joined our club who hasn't been experienced with Toastmasters before, who joins because they want the leadership experience. But we're always hoping that they'll develop that want the leadership experience. And maybe you've had a different experience there. They could certainly join or visit other clubs for more practice. And then we reference that there's opportunity for involvement in other things. Then again, narrowing the funnel, we'll say, well, what's the educational program? Well, it's Pathways. And I don't go into a ton of detail yet, but I just say it's called Pathways. And I'll be walking you through how to get to the Pathways site, how to choose the area of interest for you, and how to get started. Right? And there's some details about how they get started in Pathways. All right, so just to back up, the categories I've got here: Toastmasters components, educational manuals, now Pathways, right? It used to be different. And then how do they actually find information and sign up for roles? And I really want them to be familiar with our own website or club site. And this lists information about it. Even give them tips on how to log in, because that's not very intuitive. And how to view agendas, how to sign up, and what to do if they're missing a meeting. So it's kind of those general nuts and bolts of just how to figure out what the lay of the land is.
Denise, can you share that document with us?
Yeah, I'm gonna, you'll be getting the Google Docs link in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah, before we end here. And then the 5 quick tips for a quick start. So participating in table topics, scheduling the icebreaker speech. And this link is, it's not a Toastmasters International site, but it's kind of some cool insights on writing an icebreaker speech, how to sign up for roles. And one of the things, again, remember pacing. If one of the things with new member orientation is pacing to help them not feel overwhelmed. And we always suggest that they sign up for the same role twice in a row. Because the first time it's, what do I do? The second time they're more familiar with it. And then of course, making them aware that any member, not just me, the VP of Ed, or whoever the VP of Ed is at that time, is there to help them. Everyone's there to help them. Okay. That's like the nuts and bolts stuff. And remember, people first join for a reason. So I've got a goal questionnaire for them. I'm curious about what their sense of urgency is with a need, because then I might help push them a little faster or point them towards specific areas in different ways. I give them a chance, like if they've got some specific presentations or meetings coming up, that's helpful to know. We've had some members join specifically because they just been tapped to present at a conference. So we were able to fit them in to practice a piece of their conference presentation that helped them say, oh, wow, okay, this is really practical, this Toastmaster stuff. Have them visualize, so a year from now, how will you be different as a result? How might you change as a speaker, leader, community member, other? And I have them do this. What might get in the way of them achieving their goals? And then what support will help them achieve their goals? And then when you actually meet with them, this is a great time to say, they might have an idea of the support that could help them, or they might say, I don't know. And then that's where some of the other things can really help. Like, well, we can match you up with a mentor or a more experienced member. We can make sure that, we talk before you have a role at a meeting, so that you feel comfortable with what the responsibilities are. There's all kinds of different things that you can then offer that they might not know yet. They don't know what they don't know. But this gets them owning their reason for joining, and you become aware of it so you can help match those stuff up. Okay. So I'm monitoring my time here. 47. Okay. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, but I do need to move on. I'm going to go back to the presentation here. Oops. One sec. Okay. I have way too many windows open. Just gonna say, oh, actually, yeah, okay. I'll go to this. Here we go. Thank you again for your patience as I go from all these different formats of. So I'll show you some of those TMI resources, and as I'm doing that, I'll also get some of those links in the chat box when I'm stop talking to do this. But that's an example of the what. And actually, from the 3 things that you wrote down, is there anything that you put down on your top 3 that wasn't in that orientation document that I showed you, that funnel concept? Does anyone have something that wasn't included that you would think is top 3?
In the chat box, there was.
Say it, unmute and share. Yeah, just.
I would say one thing is to have some personal testimonies for what Toastmasters has meant for experienced members, so that a new member can understand that, you know, it really does work.
Mhm. And is your thought that that would be something they look at, or would you maybe design that as part of the meeting? Or
It might be something that would be more appropriate for like a new member meeting. If you had enough new members that you could, you know, just have like a separate little meeting off the
Mhm.
side of a club meeting.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. Other ideas? One or two? That wasn't on your list? I mean, that was on your list, but it wasn't something that was in mine.
Hey, can you hear me?
Denise?
Yep. Is that
This is
Sam or
Sam here.
Samuel?
Okay.
Yes, Samuel. Hi, good morning, everyone. First off, I want to apologize for hopping on late. For the life of me, I couldn't find my link to join the Zoom. But now that I'm here, I'm actually enjoying what I'm getting as far as the content is concerned. So I did not see the funnel, but I did have an opportunity to write down the 3 things that I'd like for a new member to grab a hold of as soon as
Mhm.
they plug in. One, and this resonated with me because I'm new. I'm a new member, and the thing that I appreciated uh, about the club was the enthusiasm. So having that feeling of enthusiasm was empowerment for me. That's what I saw it as, and people that don't normally get a chance to speak out get that. So, in addition to that, I would say it's informative, or they feel like they can get something out of it. And the last thing was just knowing that they will be mentored. So those are 3 things.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Samuel. And one of the things that brings to mind for me, the enthusiasm piece, is sometimes as a VP of Ed, we might actually need to remind the other members to show some extra enthusiasm for what they do or the role, or give them a space to share it in the meeting. And then if our ability to show our enthusiasm as well is catching, it's a healthy virus, right? So thanks for sharing that. Okay. I'm going to move on for the sake of time. So the roadmap. Here's it's simple, but not necessarily easy. The first one is use what already exists. So I'm going to show this one piece, and I might probably, someone tell me, do you see the web page or do you still see the PowerPoint screen?
PowerPoint.
Okay, got to stop sharing and reshare. Sorry, it's just different how my own works. So you log in, you go to membership and welcome new members. And there's actually a little video and some quick start information about joining pathways and how to get started, even like around the icebreaker piece. This is the easiest information to find. Some of the other information that is actually available to you, and again, as soon as I stop talking, I will share it, is they have their own checklist. You're probably not going to be able to read it on the screen unless you do your own Zoom here, but they've got their own checklist on orienting new members. Step 1, step 2 is a whole bunch, and a new member profile. So I just have a 1-page, a shorter questionnaire. This is a more specific new member profile that you might choose to have people give out. And then the other thing that's also online is a PowerPoint, a new member orientation PowerPoint presentation. And so if nothing else, there are Toastmaster information available that you can start with. And here we go. Again, I promise that I will get the links up there. You're welcome to use my template when I put that up there. So use what already exists. If you, right, that's the first step. The next is customize to your club. And something that I just recently started thinking of as well was that we had a new member join us when she'd come from another club. And I didn't realize that one of our norms as a club was for table topics, if you had just spoken, you actually aren't the first person to volunteer for table topics. We, in our club, our norm is you make space for other people to speak up first. So I was really startled the first time she did that. And I'm like, oh, well, we didn't do anything to help her understand what our norms were. Or as a table topics master to say, has anyone who doesn't have a role yet want to go first, right? So those things you can think about. And then what's going to help you do it? What are the supports that will make it happen? In terms of the orientation, like how does your orientation meeting fit in with how you match someone up with a mentor, or if you match someone up with a mentor? How do you, as a VP of Ed, or whoever might do this in the club, if you know that they're the timer for the very first time, and we know like match in virtual, that's a confusing thing. How do you say, hey, great job on timer, and help make sure that the other members know that this is that person's first time doing the role, right? And give them some kudos for that. So those are things that support the person's learning in there. And then the fourth piece is for you. Like, do you have a new member ready to start that you want to get into action? Or are you just putting this into place gradually? Do you need to figure out what the transitions are, like how smooth it is that someone gets logged on to something on the site? So those are the steps on that. It's, again, simple but not easy. What already exists, customize it. What other things can you do to support the members' learning and pacing? And then what's your action plan? Right? We are at 9:56. I am going to start the process of putting my links into the chat box, and or you can email me and I will also send you links. And I've got to, at this point, for a timing perspective, turn this over to Steve, who will then also turn it over to Jim for the wrapping piece. I really want to thank all of you for your attention and your participation in this. It's been fun for me. So